They are not victims. They don't need the protection that other victim groups on campuses need. Part of the false narrative about Israel has been that it's a racist apartheid state.
Mm-hmm.
This has started with the UN declaration that Zionism is racism, and campus radicals on university campuses, like Students for Justice in Palestine, promote this narrative that Israel is a racist apartheid regime. And so supporters of Israel, it is said, on campuses are themselves racist. And when Trump was elected, the idea that conservatives and pro-Israel people and white people and Republicans were white supremacists started to be promoted as a theory, particularly with Steve Bannon in the White House and so forth. There was another way of diminishing Trump's reputation and moral standing by calling him a white supremacist. Or after he made those comments at Charlottesville, people said that he was a supporter of neo-Nazis and white supremacists. Mm-hmm. You hear very often on campuses, or you see at demonstrations, anti-Israel demonstrations, where they accused Zionism of being equivalent to racism, and that Zionists are white supremacists because they support Israel, and Israel is portrayed as a white majority country that oppresses brown Arabs. So it becomes a racial thing. There's nothing racist about Israel and its relationship to the Palestinian Arabs. There are Israelis, as you know, who are Black, who are as brown as any Arab, and some who are white because they moved there from Europe. But to say that Israel is like South Africa, where a white minority was controlling a Black majority and had laws institutionalized and systemic racism that was part of the laws, has no analogous reference to Israel at all.
Let me, I'm glad you took it there, and I'm going to say something real quick, and just be patient with me as I make this statement. I was the co-founder of the Bishop Tutu Refugee Fund back in 1985 in Hartford, Connecticut. This is something I founded with his middle child, Naomi. And as you correctly put out, there was a time, I think the United Nations General Assembly, passed a resolution equating apartheid with Zionism. It's all racist, etc. And at that time, I just sort of accepted it. Oh, okay, yeah, it must be true. The United Nations said it's true, it must be true. Then one day, I don't know what happened. I started just checking things out. It's just like, well, what is this Zionism stuff and things about Israel and all? And I reached the same, basically, make a long story short, reached the same conclusion you did. There is no equation between apartheid and Zionism. There is no equation between the state of Israel and South Africa when it was under racist minority rule. Now, I'm speaking as someone who's part of the whole anti-apartheid solidarity movement in the United States at my college campus, Berea College in Berea, Kentucky. Very, very active in that. The boycotts, the isolation, the divestment. Co-founder of the Bishop Tutu Refugee Fund, went to South Africa as an honorary white stamped on my passport. I was there for 2.5 months. Winnie Mandela, Bishop Tutu, I saw things, interviewed a good many people. But what happened with me, doctor, was I started checking things out for myself. When they talked about Israel and they talked about Zionism, and I said, there is no equation. That's patently absurd. There's just no equation. You're right. You're 100% right. It's there. And so I just we're going to conclude here because we could talk for a long time about this madness that's happened on these campuses. And that's why it is so important. And speaking to my listeners, you got to get this ebook written by Dr. Richard Cravatt, Jew Hatred Rising, You got to get it, because it's not an exaggeration, as he said in the beginning. He said, I asked him, is it an exaggeration? Is this? He said, no. Unfortunately, no. And he has it documented here. And this is just one ebook. There are other books you can get, but this is one you definitely need to get. You definitely need to read. And then you need to share with other people. Because speaking as an evangelical Christian, I'm disturbed, very, very disturbed, very, very upset about this anti-Semitism I'm seeing on college campuses. Because eventually, I don't know how you feel about this, doctor, but I think it's going to, like a cancer, it's going to spread from the campus and come more into general society. I mean, what are some of your
that's already happened.
Elaborate a little bit, please.
Well, the danger that I see, there are many people, and there have been over millennia, who don't like Jews for a variety of reasons.
Mm-hmm.
The existence of Israel has made it convenient, as I think I mentioned to you, for people that hate Jews to not have to go public with that animosity and pretend that they don't mind Jews, they just despise Israel, the Jewish state.
Mm-hmm.
So it's difficult to tell sometimes if a person actually cares about the Palestinian cause or doesn't really care about the Palestinians at all and is using Palestinian self-determination as a way for them to express their hatred towards Jews and the Jewish state. Because how else can we explain the obsession with Israel, the one country,
yes,
where the majority of resolutions at the UN Security Council are against Israel, more than all other countries combined, this little tiny country.
Yes.
When Uyghur Muslims in China are being interred in virtual concentration camps, and Uyghur women are being forced to abort babies and use IUDs to prevent any more births, that
yes,
they're talking about apartheid in Israel. And Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International this year released reports confirming the false idea that Israel practices apartheid, because they redefined it in a way that makes it totally different than what existed in South Africa. But
yes,
they did it so that people could quote those reports, which they did in those statements of solidarity that I mentioned earlier during
yes,
the May incursions into Gaza. All of those statements included language that said that Human Rights Watch had called Israel an apartheid state. And even though it was false, it gains traction. And the danger is that if something existentially dangerous happens to Israel, where Iran wants to eliminate it with a nuclear weapon, for example, who would rush to support a nation that is accused of being the new Nazis, that is practicing apartheid, that is an oppressive colonial regime depriving an indigenous people of their rights and human and civil rights? Maybe a lot of people will say, I don't want to help Israel because it's so awful. Even though it's false.
I completely agree with you. And again, that was our whole thinking in the anti-apartheid solidarity, was to delegitimize the state, to delegitimize it totally. And this is why I want to emphasize to people. Again, I was the co-founder of the Bishop Tutu Refugee Fund. I spent time with Bishop Tutu himself, the family in South Africa and all. I don't know what the bishop's position is on certain things, but I can tell you, as a person who's done the study, extensive amount of study, research, witnessed things for myself. I wrote a small booklet called Apartheid, the Untold Story. There is no equation between apartheid and Zionism. There is no equation between racist minority rule, apartheid South Africa, and the modern state of Israel. There is none. It's not there, folks. It's a lie. It's a brazen lie.
And you raised an interesting point. Even though there was a worldwide condemnation of apartheid in South Africa, there was never a call to destroy South Africa and to purge it and to kill all of its white citizens
Right. That's
and
right.
to eliminate South Africa totally, as there is about Israel. So it's not
Yes.
only Israel, like any other country, should be criticized if they're doing something wrong or immoral or illegal. And no Israeli or any defender of Israel has any problem with Israel being criticized. But the type of criticism, which is way disproportionate to any other country, solely focusing on Israel and Israel alone, while other countries and totalitarian regimes such as China and Iran and Yemen, North Korea, are treating their citizens and their neighbors in much more pathological and perverse and illegal ways than Israel. And yet we focus relentlessly on Israel. That's a type of anti-Semitism, according to the International Holocaust Alliance definition of what anti-Semitism is in a contemporary sense.
Doctor, I want to thank you so much for your time today. We're going to conclude here. Again, could you please let my listeners know where they can get your ebook, Jew Hatred Rising?
Thank you so much.
Appreciate you, but Doctor, maybe we can do this again sometime.
Nice being with you.